Hi everyone, it's James here from Pro Tools Expert, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the Acoustic Samples B-5 organ. Now, this is probably unlike any other Hammond organ virtual instrument you've ever tried or ever heard. One, it's sample based rather than synthesis based, but there is an element of synthesis in there. I'm not going to get too nerdy or geeky on the whole sound reproduction engine thing right now, but just trust me, this thing sounds ace. So most of this demo is going to be based around actually listening to this thing. I've got 4 or 5 examples for you to have a listen to. So let's dive straight in and let me show you around the GUI. So B-5 sits within the UVI workstation, and I have to admit this is my first time using this particular player, and it's really stable, working really well for me. So this is the B-5 organ, and it's laid out pretty much like a C3 or a B3 depending on where you are in the world. We have our drawbars for our upper manual, drawbars for our lower manual, and drawbars for our bass. Now this is where this thing really differs from any other Hammond you've heard before. It's designed to replace the proper 2 manual plus bass pedals organ. Many of them just try and do 1 manual, which is great, and they do it really well. But the cool thing about the B-5 is that you can actually address each of the manuals separately, and we'll look at that shortly. So we've got our drawbars, our different percussion settings, on and off for many different things, our swell pedal, different options for how the vibrato kicks in, volume, normal or soft. We then have our preset selection, and there are plenty of them to choose from. We then have our volume controls to blend the acoustic click volume, the actual acoustic sound of the instrument, the main volume, tube distortion, and some reverb. Now down here alongside the bass pedals, we have our speaker preferences. Now one of the cool things about what they've done here is they've taken many different cabinet models, modeled them really accurately, giving you an in and out, like a bypass switch. We've then got horn and drum volume, air, which effectively creates a stereo width image, our choral speed, tremolo speed, and pitch modulation. We can also, if we want to, make the microphones mono so we don't get such a broad, massive signal. But I'll show you this as we go through some of the audio examples. Now this little button down here, Advanced Preferences, is very handy for actually setting up the B-5 for how you want to work. Now in these examples, I've got 3 different MIDI channels feeding in to each of the upper, lower and bass manuals. But I could set it with split points. I then have different mod settings which I can tweak on each of the manuals. My options for the percussion recharge time, which is exactly like you'd have on the real thing. Any presets that I want to have set up as soon as I load up the B-5. Bass pedal volume with string bass kind of sustain setting. Everything is there. This thing is really nice. But the single most important thing is the sound. So let's get in and play some of these examples I've got here. As we go through, I'm probably going to tweak the drawbars and tweak some of the settings just so you can hear how very versatile and how real this thing sounds. You can hear that lovely string bass kind of sound kicking in. If I go into preferences again. Let's try that with some Leslie modulation this time. I love the way that the Hammond organ is almost like the first synthesizer, the first real grab it, start messing around with stuff, get your sound the way you like it synth. tone wheel organs were some of the first electronic musical instruments. So to say that this thing is almost the birth of synthesis wouldn't be that far off the mark, really. So let's move on to this next example, and I'm going to change my preset to, well, C minor traditional, but listen to the sound. I love that. They've even got, as the drawbars move in and out, you've got the little clicks. My favourite thing about this as well is if you turn the main volume down, there's the clicks of the keyboard. I love that. Now, one of the things I most like about B-5 is that you actually have to work the manuals and the bass pedals off against each other for volume. You have to actually mix for real. You have to mix internally within the instrument. Now, that's really, really cool. Of course, I could have more than one B-5 set up. But this way, you're getting all the sympathetic resonance between the cabinet, and it's just sounding really real and really gritty. So let's jump on here, and let's get a bit nastier. So we're going to have some power chords at the top and some soft chords down the bottom. Let's try this. Let's wind some tube in. I think this thing sounds absolutely killer. It's really versatile, and yet it sounds like the real deal. I love it. So, Jimmy Smith was undoubtedly one of the most famous Hammond players. Let's find something a little bit more soulful for this one. I could quite literally be playing with this thing all day. It sounds absolutely killer. I'm really loving it. Hammond is one of the most difficult instruments to record in real life because the cabinet has so many different kind of options and positions and things like that. It's a really, really difficult thing to get right. So actually finding a really good, really usable VI for this sort of thing is absolutely fantastic. And if you are a Joey DeFrancesca fan, this thing just ticks every single box. So I've got one more example to show you, and that's a kind of how this thing sits in the mix. It's all very well being a solo instrument, and that's great, but let's see how it sits in the mix. This is one of my favourite tracks that really does feature the Hammond organ. When I was a kid growing up, one of my favourite groups, believe it or not, was Focus. And the Hocus Pocus album was always on vinyl, always on in my house. So it made a lot of sense for me to try and reproduce that famous track. So this will give you some idea of how the B-5 sits in within a mix. So you can see here my settings. I've gone all out pretty much on everything just to get that kind of really big fat sound. So let's have a listen to my version of Sylvia. there you go, my version of Sylvia. I think the B-5 by Acoustic Samples sits really nicely in this track. It's got the presence that says, look, I'm a really important part of this track, but at the same time, using that swell pedal and the Leslie controls, absolutely beautiful. This will make a really, really nice addition to my VI arsenal, and certainly will be replacing what I'm currently using for Hammond. But for now, I've been James from Pro Tools Expert, and I'll see you again soon for some more gear talk.